such kind and genuine words, and I feel very seen.
The gates of Malacañang Palace have welcomed many of the Philippines' greatest heroes. Olympic champions, boxing legends, celebrated artists, and national icons have all walked through those historic halls. But on July 13, 2026, something extraordinary happened. A 21-year-old tennis player from Manila stepped inside, and the president of the Philippines suddenly sounded less like a head of state and more like an excited fan meeting his favorite athlete. "I'm really so happy to have you here. You cannot imagine." This is one of those occasions where I say to myself, it's good to be president. The president wasn't simply hosting another ceremonial reception. He was welcoming an athlete who had captured the imagination of an entire nation. And as Alex Eala received the Presidential Citation, millions watched a moment that instantly became part of Philippine sporting history. Yet the most unforgettable words didn't come from the president. They came from Eala herself. "I feel very seen. All the hours that aren't on TV are seen and validated and appreciated." It was a simple statement, but behind it were years of sacrifice, thousands of unseen hours, and a journey that had brought her from neighborhood tennis courts to the highest office in the Philippines. The phone call came just hours after one of the most emotional days of Alex Eala's life. On July 12, 2026, she had returned home through NI Terminal 3, where thousands of supporters filled the arrival area waving Philippine flags and chanting her name. The atmosphere felt less like an airport arrival and more like a national celebration. The Banda Kawayan Pilipinas welcomed her with bamboo instruments, while government officials including Philippine Olympic Committee President Abraham Bambal Tolentino and Philippine Sports Commission Chairman Patrick Pato Gregorio stood ready to greet the country's newest sporting hero. After greeting fans, signing autographs, and taking in the overwhelming reception, another surprise was waiting. The office of the president had reached out. President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. wanted to personally welcome her to Malacañang Palace. "Alex, I want to welcome you to Malacañang," the president told her. "The entire nation is proud of you." For the 21-year-old tennis star, it was almost impossible to process. Only days earlier, she had produced one of the greatest victories in Philippine tennis history, defeating defending Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek 7-6, 9-6-2 on center court. The win made her the first Filipino in the Open era to reach the fourth round of a Grand Slam singles tournament and propelled her to a career-high ranking of world number 28. Now, another historic milestone awaited. An invitation to the country's highest office. This wasn't merely a formal courtesy extended to a successful athlete. It was recognition of what Eala had come to represent. Her achievements had inspired millions of Filipinos at home and abroad, proving that a young woman from Manila could compete and win on one of the biggest stages in world sport. The palace scheduled the reception for July 13, where President Marcos and First Lady Liza Marcos would welcome Eala inside Ceremonial Hall. Joining her would be the people who had made so much of the journey possible. Her parents, Mike and Riza Eala, whose years of sacrifice had allowed their daughter to pursue a dream that once seemed almost impossible. At just 14 years old, Alex had left the Philippines to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain. She spent years away from home, enduring demanding training sessions, difficult defeats, homesickness, and relentless competition. Most of those moments happened far away from television cameras. Few people saw the countless early mornings, the exhausting practices, or the sacrifices required to compete among the world's elite. Now, those unseen years were leading her somewhere she had never imagined, not to another tennis stadium, but to Malacañang Palace, where the president himself wanted to thank her on behalf of an entire nation. What happened inside those historic halls would become one of the most emotional moments of Alex Eala's career. Because before the evening was over, the president of the Philippines would make a heartfelt confession that no one expected, and Alex Eala's response would leave the entire country speechless. When Alex Eala entered the ceremonial hall of Malacañang Palace, she was stepping into one of the most historic rooms in the Philippines. Over the decades, the hall had welcomed presidents, foreign dignitaries, decorated soldiers, artists, and national champions. On this evening, however, the spotlight belonged to a 21-year-old tennis player whose Wimbledon run had united an entire country. As President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. approached the podium, it quickly became clear that this would not be an ordinary ceremonial speech. He wasn't reading prepared remarks with formal distance. He was speaking as someone who had genuinely followed Eala's remarkable journey. Almost immediately, the president surprised everyone with an unexpected confession. "I'm a fan, so I'm gushing. I'm a real fan of yours." The room broke into smiles. Then he revealed something even more personal. One day I hope I'll have the opportunity to watch you. It doesn't have to be at a grand slam. I'd be happy just watching you practice. It was an extraordinary moment. The leader of the nation wasn't asking for a courtside seat at Wimbledon. He simply wanted the chance to watch one of the country's brightest athletes do what she loved. That sincerity changed the atmosphere inside the room. The reception no longer felt like a government ceremony. It felt like an entire nation expressing its appreciation through its president. Marcos continued by admitting that this event meant far more to him than protocol. Whenever we have these programs, I usually begin by saying, "It's my pleasure to receive you." Sometimes that's simply the polite thing to say. He paused before adding, "But tonight, that's not politeness. I'm really so happy to have you here. You cannot imagine. This is one of those occasions where I say to myself, it's good to be president." The audience responded with warm laughter before applauding. For many watching, it was refreshing to see such genuine emotion from the country's highest office. The president then reflected on the moment that had captivated millions of Filipinos only days earlier, Eala's stunning victory over defending Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek. He admitted that like countless supporters across the country, he had watched every point with growing emotion. "After you won, we all cried," he recalled. "This is Wimbledon. There is no higher level in professional tennis." But Marcos made it clear that Eala's impact extended well beyond one unforgettable victory. He praised the humility and composure she had displayed throughout her rise. "You have brought such pride to the Philippines, not only because of your success, but because of the grace with which you handle that success." He added that Eala represented the finest qualities Filipinos hope to show the world, not just through victory, but through character. One quality impressed him more than any other. Despite becoming an international star, she never stopped reminding the world where she came from. "You never fail to remind everyone that you're a Filipina," Marcos said. "That means so much to all of us." By the end of his remarks, the audience understood that this evening wasn't simply about honoring a champion. It was about celebrating someone who had become a source of national pride. Yet, as emotional as the president's words were, the most powerful moment of the night was still to come. Because when Alex Eala stepped to the microphone, she revealed the side of success that millions of people had never seen. Alex Eala has played in front of packed stadiums. She has competed against Grand Slam champions. She has stood on center court at Wimbledon with millions watching around the world. Yet as she approached the microphone inside Malacañang Palace, she admitted something that surprised everyone. She was nervous. "I have to confess," she began with a smile. "I normally don't get very nervous when I have to speak, but today is the exception." The honesty immediately resonated with the audience. For perhaps the first time since returning home, Filipinos were seeing not the rising tennis superstar, but the young woman behind the headlines. She first thanked President Marcos for the extraordinary recognition. "Thank you, Mr. President, for this special honor and for the warm welcome." Then she reflected on how unimaginable the evening felt. "Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be having dinner here at Malacañang Palace beside you and receiving such kind and genuine words." It was clear this wasn't simply another award ceremony. For Eala, it represented validation for years of sacrifice that few people had witnessed. Then came the sentence that instantly spread across news reports and social media. "I feel very seen." She paused before explaining why those words meant so much. "Hearing that from you makes me feel like all the hard work I've done is seen. All the hours that aren't on TV are seen, validated, and appreciated." Those words captured something every athlete understands. Fans celebrate victories, but very few ever witness the thousands of quiet hours required to create them. The early mornings, the difficult losses, the injuries, the loneliness of living overseas. The sacrifices made long before anyone is paying attention. For Eala, this recognition wasn't only about Wimbledon. It was about every unseen step that had led there. She then shifted her attention to the Filipino people whose support had followed her throughout the journey. "I cannot begin to describe how overjoyed I am to see how my progress has been received by the Filipino people. It warms my heart because I know it comes from a profound and shared love for our nation." That theme of national pride became the emotional center of her speech. Speaking partly in Filipino, she declared, "Lubos kong ipinagmamalaki ang pagiging Filipino." "I am deeply proud to be Filipino." She explained that wherever tennis takes her, she carries the Philippine flag with her, not just on her uniform, but in her identity. "Where you come from is a big part of who you are," she said. That belief has shaped every stage of her career. It also inspired the promise that concluded her speech. "I promise that I will continue representing the Philippines in the best way that I possibly can." The room erupted into applause. It wasn't simply a promise about tennis. It was a promise about responsibility, about carrying the hopes of millions with humility. and about ensuring that every future victory would always reflect the country she proudly calls home. As the applause echoed through the ceremonial hall, one final moment remained: the formal presentation of the Presidential Citation, a distinction that would permanently place Alex Eala among the Philippines' most celebrated sporting figures. With the speeches complete, the evening reached its defining moment. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. stepped forward holding the framed Presidential Citation, a distinction reserved for Filipinos whose achievements have brought exceptional honor to the country. For Alex Eala, it represented far more than an official document. It symbolized years of sacrifice finally receiving national recognition. The citation praised her historic accomplishments as the first Filipina to achieve unprecedented success on the international professional tennis circuit, recognizing not only her talent but also the perseverance and discipline that carried her to the world's biggest stages. It also highlighted something equally important: her ability to inspire. The document recognized Eala for encouraging a new generation of Filipino athletes to pursue excellence through hard work, resilience, and dedication, qualities that had become synonymous with her journey. As he presented the award, President Marcos reflected on how long he had followed her career. He recalled watching her early breakthroughs and believing she was only beginning to reveal her potential. "She's just getting started," he had once remarked. Standing beside her in Malacañang Palace, those words felt more accurate than ever. The president then turned his attention to the people who had quietly shared every step of Eala's journey: her parents. "Success," he explained, "is never built by one person alone." He acknowledged the difficult decision Mike and Riza Eala made when they allowed their daughter to leave home at just 14 years old to pursue her dream in Spain. Few parents would willingly watch their child move halfway around the world at such a young age. Fewer still could endure the years of distance, uncertainty, and sacrifice that followed. Yet they believed in her dream long before the rest of the country did. That recognition added another emotional layer to the evening. The celebration was no longer just about one remarkable athlete. It had become a tribute to the family who made her journey possible. President Marcos concluded by reminding everyone why Eala's success resonated so deeply across the Philippines. She had become more than a champion. She had become a symbol of what Filipinos could accomplish on the global stage without losing their humility, identity, or love for their country. As photographers captured the presentation of the Presidential Citation, the applause filling the ceremonial hall reflected something larger than one sporting achievement. It was the sound of a nation embracing one of its newest icons. Yet before the evening ended, Alex Eala would leave Filipinos with one final message, a promise that would define her legacy far beyond Wimbledon. As the ceremony drew to a close, Alex Eala stood before the audience with the Presidential Citation now in her hands. The applause gradually faded. The cameras remained fixed on her. Everyone wanted to hear what she would say next. Rather than speaking about rankings or trophies, Eala returned to the values that had guided her throughout her career. Speaking with quiet conviction, she declared, "Lubos kong ipinagmamalaking paging Filipino. I am deeply proud to be Filipino." She explained that no matter where tennis takes her, she carries the Philippine flag with pride because where a person comes from becomes part of who they are. That belief, she said, shapes the way she competes both on and off the court. Then came the promise that would become the defining message of the evening. "I promise that I will continue to represent the Philippines in the best way that I possibly can." The audience rose in applause. It wasn't simply a commitment to winning matches. It was a promise to honor the trust and support that millions of Filipinos had placed in her. Looking around the ceremonial hall, Eala reflected on how much the country's encouragement had meant during the most demanding moments of her career. She spoke about sharing her recent Wimbledon run with the Filipino people, describing it as something far bigger than an individual achievement. "Tagumpay ito nating lahat. This victory belongs to all of us." Those few words perfectly captured why her story had resonated so deeply. Every sacrifice made by her family, every early morning practice, every supporter who stayed awake to watch her matches from halfway across the world, every young athlete who dared to believe because of her success. They had all become part of the journey. President Marcos echoed that sentiment in his closing remarks, assuring Eala that the entire nation stood behind her, not only because of what she had accomplished, but because of the grace, humility, and authenticity she displayed throughout her rise. He also paid tribute once more to her parents, recognizing the courage it took to let their daughter chase a dream that carried her far from home. Their belief, he noted, helped create a champion who had inspired an entire country. As the evening concluded, official photographs captured Alex Eala standing beside the President and First Lady, proudly holding the Presidential Citation. The image instantly became one of the defining photographs of Philippine sport in 2026. Yet perhaps the greatest significance of the evening could not be captured in a single picture. It lived in Eala's own words, "I feel very seen." For years, the hardest work had happened far from television cameras, the endless practices, the difficult defeats, the homesickness, the sacrifices that rarely make headlines. Inside Malacañang Palace, all of those unseen moments finally received the recognition they deserved. As Eala left the palace that evening, another chapter of her career was already waiting. The North American hardcourt season, the Wimbledon DC Open, the Canadian Open, the US Open, new challenges, new expectations, new opportunities to make history. But whatever happened next, one thing had already become certain. Alex Eala's Wimbledon breakthrough had introduced her to the world. Her homecoming had introduced her to history. Because the reception at Malacañang wasn't simply about honoring one extraordinary athlete, it was about celebrating perseverance, honoring sacrifice, and reminding every Filipino that dreams built with patience, discipline, and unwavering belief can inspire an entire nation. The Eala effect had reached the highest office in the land. And from that moment forward, it was no longer just a tennis story. It had become part of the story of the Philippines.